receiving care at hospital. In parallel to this, with a difference of few hours, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Tsige, along with his friend, a retired Major General Gezai Abera, both lost their lives in an organized and coordinated attack by the bodyguard.
Well, let's get you more on this story. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi is joining me on the line from Addis Ababa. Coletta, the government says the alleged coup attempt leader has been killed. Have they released any further details on the circumstances under which he was shot?
Yes, Beatrice, the reports we're getting is that there was a battle between the security forces in the Amhara region and the Brigadier General Tsige today, much earlier today. He was asked to surrender and he refused. And during the battle, that's when he lost his life. So he lost his life while he was trying to defend himself and refusing to bow into the requirements of the security forces.
Well, Coletta, does this mean that this is the end and final resolution to the issue, or are there people still being pursued over Saturday's killings?
I think it's just the beginning, Beatrice. We can say it's just the beginning of the Prime Minister and the federal government and also with the regional government trying to find out what really happened. The head of the Amhara police has given reports that so far 178 people have been arrested and have been said to be in connection to what happened on Saturday. And he has said that of this, it is interesting to note that 4 are part of who have been arrested are part of the Amhara government officials, high-level officials, and amongst them, of course, is the deputy head of the security forces of the Amhara region. So it's just the beginning, because apparently the government wants, and everybody else wants to know, what is it that caused the head of the security forces in the military, in the Amhara region, to turn against his own leadership.
And how would you describe the mood in the capital, Addis Ababa, with all this going on, Coletta?
Well, Beatrice, in Addis Ababa, if you came to Addis Ababa today, it was just business as usual. You wouldn't even know something had happened. Of course, there's tension amongst the citizens, people whispering, people speculating. But in the streets of Addis Ababa, the streets look calm. Businesses opened as usual. There was no obvious heavy military personnel as people had expected, or uniformed personnel. But there have been some vehicle checkpoints in some parts of the city. And at the residences of the General Sahara Mekonnen and his friend, retired Major General Gezai Abera, they both live within the city. There have been, tents have been put out in one of the houses, and people have been flocking in to condole with the relatives. But also, which is worth noting, is that some businesses, especially those that depend on internet, have really suffered, because remember, internet was shut down on Saturday evening, and that also includes the African Union. Today there was no internet, and this has caused more tension, especially amongst the foreigners, because they do not know what really happened, when the internet will come back, when they'll resume the normal kind of communication through internet and all that. But generally, it just looks normal.
Coletta Wanjohi joining us there on the line from Addis Ababa. Thank you. Let's now head to Egypt, where 2 lawyers who were abducted 12 days ago are still missing. ISIL's arm in the Sinai has claimed responsibility for the incident that happened on Friday. After nearly 2 years of limited operation, June has seen ISIL forcefully taking about 14 people in the remote hideouts for questioning. Here's Adel Mahroui with the latest on that.
June has seen a rise of ISIL's attacks against civilians. The terrorist group wants to spread fear among any North Sinai resident who cooperates with the Egyptian authorities. So far, it has abducted 14 civilians, among them 2 lawyers. The group has also killed at least 3 laborers working on a security fence for Al Arish airport on Saturday.
Abductions give ISIL the propaganda they are hungry for. It gives them economic incentives as they get ransom to release the victims. They also execute some of these abducted people for treason against the group. ISIL wants residents to fear dealing with the authorities.
Fearing the safety of North Sinai lawyers, the Egyptian Justice Ministry has postponed all trials indefinitely. Meanwhile, the 2 lawyers remain missing.
Despite these recent incidents in the Sinai, they remain somewhat limited in comparison to the number of attacks seen 4 years ago. The armed forces have greatly advanced. It's why the numbers of those abducted are much less than what gets reported in other places like Iraq.
Shifting its attacks towards civilians is an indication, analysts say, that ISIL doesn't have enough power as it used to engage against security forces. Civilians are everywhere and usually unarmed, which makes them an easier target for the group and a more challenging mission for the authorities. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The former DRC Vice President and warlord Jean-Pierre Bemba has called on supporters to hold peaceful protests across the country to demand democracy and good governance. Bemba arrived in the capital Kinshasa for a second time after over a decade in exile and prison. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more.
Thousands of supporters of Jean-Pierre Bemba lining the streets of Kinshasa to welcome him back from Belgium. Mr. Bemba is back in the DRC after spending 10 months in Belgium. He left the country last year after he was put on a 24-hour surveillance by the police and had his presidential bid rejected by the Electoral Commission. He is urging his supporters to hold peaceful protests to push for reforms in the country.
We want to hold a peaceful protest on the 30th of June. All of you should be there to demand for our rights that have been trampled on.
Mr. Bemba is a member of the Lamuka party that put forward Martin Fayulu as its presidential candidate in last year's polls. The party rejected the outcome after President Felix Tshisekedi was declared the winner.
With Jean-Pierre Bemba back, I believe we will become victorious. I'm so excited about his return.
The former rebel leader had his war crimes conviction overturned by the International Criminal Court in June last year, after spending 11 years in prison. The call for protests comes as the country awaits the announcement of a new cabinet. President Tshisekedi and his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, are reported to have agreed on the list of ministers who will form the new government. Jean-Pierre Bemba and his colleagues from the Lamuka party plan to travel the country campaigning on the issue of democratic rights. They hope it will raise awareness about issues of governance and encourage people to hold leaders to account. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Scientists cite climate change as Kenya's wildebeest spectacle begins much earlier than usual. And temperatures rise across Europe, triggering a blistering heat wave as summer kicks in.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The wildebeest migration spectacle normally begins in mid-June and continues to September. But this year, the herbivores started their long trek at the end of May. Scientists attribute the phenomenon to the change in weather patterns, with the delayed rains disrupting the migrating patterns. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa is following the event at the Masai Mara Game Reserve and has this story.
The animals graze on a sunny patch in the Serengeti, overlooking the Masai Mara. Between these two sides is a river. When the annual wildebeest migration begins, the wildebeest will cross the river in hordes, an annual spectacle which draws thousands of tourists.
The last time I was here was right in the middle of the migration, which was absolutely awe-inspiring.
But the tourists gathered here today won't be so lucky. The beasts will not cross over to the other side today. The annual wildebeest migration is an eagerly anticipated phenomenon. Thousands of wildebeest making their way from Tanzania across the river and into Kenya. This year the migration began early and then stopped.
It is always difficult to predict when the migration will happen or over exactly which month they will come. But this year somehow they came a little bit unexpected, quite early.
The migration usually begins in mid-July. Ecologists have found that the crossing is connected to rainfall patterns. The wildebeest leave the Serengeti when the dry spell starts for the green pastures in the Mara.
So as a result of the dry weather in the Serengeti, the animals started moving into the Mara earlier than expected. We started seeing the first animals in the beginning of June, whereas we'd expect them early to mid-July. And then it rained in early June, and that sent all the animals back into the Serengeti.
It isn't the first time that this has happened. Erratic weather patterns have had an impact on the migration patterns in recent years.
The researchers that have been looking at it have said in the last 10 years, on average, the wildebeest are spending 35 days less per year in the Mara than they were in the past. And that's probably because of the weather.
This is attributed in part to global warming, with crucial water towers in danger. But in this area, environmentalists are working tirelessly to conserve the ecosystem, working to preserve it so that every year, at around the same time, thousands can assemble to marvel at the awe-inspiring spectacle that is the wildebeest migration. Beatrice Marshall, CGTN, Masai Mara, Kenya.
Well, let's cross over now to Wilkista in the Masai Mara. She's live for us from there. Wilkista, do explain to us this turn of events where we understand the wildebeest phenomenon is happening earlier than usual. What can you tell us about that?
Well, thank you, Beatrice. Well, the wildebeest migration is linked to the rainfall patterns. The reason why the wildebeest move from the Serengeti is essentially in search of green pasture. And this year, there was an extended dry period in the Serengeti that drove the wildebeest to leave the Serengeti earlier than they usually do to come and find green pasture on the side of the Mara. That is the Kenyan side. And therefore, it was not a long period because shortly after they moved, the rain started in the Serengeti and they did move back. So you would say it was a bit of a false alarm because those who had assembled waiting for the wildebeest migration to continue are a little disappointed because they did cross over back to the other side. However, they are expected to come back because the rainfall is expected to clear within around 2 or 3 weeks, at which point the wildebeest migration will begin at around the same time it usually does every year. So we would say that the earlier migration was a bit of an anomaly, Beatrice.
Well, Kista, it was still rather interesting, though, despite it being an anomaly. But the migration is a world-famous event each year. How would you describe the attraction and the visitor numbers to the Masai Mara this year?
Well, I would say it is awe-inspiring, and those we spoke to, some of them were tourists who have been here for 4 or 5 different migration seasons, and every time they see it, it is awe-inspiring, it is new, it never fails to be exciting. This year, we have seen a number of tourists already starting to come down pretty early because of the news that the migration had started earlier. From some of the hoteliers and some of the tour operators and tour guides who were able to speak to, we understand that upwards of 40,000 foreign visitors are expected every year during the wildebeest migration season. This year, perhaps because it started early, the numbers might be a bit higher, we are not quite sure. And then we will also remember that this was the year when the Madaraka Day celebrations were held in Narok County, where the Masai Mara is, and the park was open to the public at no fee at all. We do understand that about 1,000 or so guests were able to take advantage of that offer and come in. So we do expect that probably by the time the season will be over, the number of visitors who will have visited the Mara this year might be higher than other years, or a pretty good number, because already this weekend we did see the numbers very, very high. Beatrice.
Wilkista Nyabwa joining us there from the Masai Mara. Lucky her, witnessing the phenomenon of the wildebeest migration. Zimbabwe's health ministry insists it has enough ARV stocks to last up to the first quarter of 2020, rebutting claims that the country could soon run out of the life-saving medication due to foreign currency crunch.
Despite repeated assurances from the government that there's no need to panic, People living with HIV are worried because the supply situation is deteriorating.
On a normal scale, you'll find that clients in care receive up to 3 months supply of ARVs. But in this instance, they're receiving a month's supply, and others even weeks' supply. So that means that there's that shortage. Clients are not able to get their meds, the required 3 months. They're getting far much less than they should be getting.
But the Health Ministry maintains the same line it repeated in emailed responses to our questions. For our main first line, which caters for over 95% of the population taking ARVs, we have enough stocks to last up to the first quarter of 2020. For patients who fail first line, we switch them to second line, and for these second line ARV medicines, we have stocks that will last us up to the fourth quarter of this year. It does, however, acknowledge it's yet to make a $6 million contribution to the Global Fund, leaving it dangerously close to missing out on a $400 million annual grant that will keep the supplies of ARVs coming. That could plunge Zimbabwe's HIV response into crisis, undoing decades of progress made in lowering deaths and expanding access to treatment. The challenge, like most of Zimbabwe's problems, is a shortage of foreign currency to meet international payments. The Health Ministry is engaging Treasury to allocate the foreign currency needs sooner rather than later. Any delay could leave many in danger.
And without ARVs, there's issues of people defaulting on treatment. And once people default on treatment, there are issues of resistance. And if not issues of resistance, it's death.
There are about 1.2 million people living with HIV in Zimbabwe who are dependent on antiretroviral treatment. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Foreign Affairs and Defense Ministers from Russia and Egypt are meeting in Moscow for bilateral talks. This comes as Russia continues its efforts to build influence in the Middle East and Africa. From Moscow, CGTN's Julia Chapman has more.
The main topics for discussion between Russian and Egyptian officials have been security issues, the fight against terrorism, and nuclear non-proliferation. The Russian Foreign Ministry says there is a special nature to the interaction between Moscow and Cairo. The two countries have built closer ties since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came to power. That's particularly apparent in the economic cooperation between Russia and Egypt. Egypt is Russia's largest trading partner in Africa, accounting for $6.2 billion in exports from Russia in 2017. During this visit, an agreement has been signed to introduce a Russian industrial zone in the Egyptian city of Port Said. It will take several years to implement, but it's aimed at giving Russian companies preferential tariffs and greater access to Egyptian projects. As Russia tries to grow its influence in Africa, it will play host later this year to the Russia-Africa Summit. Russia hopes the event will attract a large number of leaders from the continent. Egyptian President Sisi was the first to confirm his attendance, and he will be co-chairing the summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
Let's go to Europe now, where temperatures were climbing on Sunday as Europe braced for a blistering heat wave, with the mercury set to hit 40 degrees Celsius as summer kicks in on the back of a wave of hot air from North Africa. Europe is set for baking temperatures, with forecasters warning of record-breaking highs for June. Countries have begun issuing guidelines for surviving the scorch. Local authorities and hospitals are on high alert for a surge in cases of dehydration, heat stroke and other weather-related conditions. Britain's Met Office shared concerns that the extreme heat could bring on violent storms. Spain's AMET, a weather agency, has already issued a yellow alert for severe weather. Meteorologists warn that this latest intense heat wave shows the impact of global warming on the planet, with possibilities such weather conditions are likely to become more frequent.
It's really unpleasant, but we are used to it, unlike other people. So we are not really preparing specifically, but as you see, we are walking. You have to make sure you stay hydrated. For us, it doesn't really bother us.
We are taking precautionary measures. We listen to the news. We follow the advice they give us. We drink water. We wear light clothes, but we really are going to spend the day at the aquarium, keeping cool inside where it's air conditioned, and we lay low until the evening.
Well, I think the weather is much hotter than what I expect, because I thought in Europe the weather may be nicer than this. It's too hot for me, actually.
This is a severe or even very severe heat wave, particularly for Thursday and Friday, which is similar to the 2003 heat wave in terms of the degree of temperatures reached, which will probably be shorter, but we do not really know when the end of the episode will occur. We are giving instructions to various companies to revisit their schedules and their ways of working in order to avoid public transport as much as possible. And all companies that can telework are encouraged to do so, and all those who can adopt their opening and closing times should also be encouraged to do so to avoid people being in difficult situations at the hottest times of the day.
Children should drink water, limit physical activity, or even humidify the body. But there are certain number of points of attention that particularly affect children. Cover them well, protect them from the sun with caps, glasses, long-sleeve t-shirts. Do not leave them in the car, even for a very short time. It's very important to remember this. And then, once again, to pay very close attention to water points. Never take your eyes off the children. We had 1,600 drownings last year, with many children and adolescents among them.
Well, let's now go to Rama Nyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe has declared its interim currency, the RTGS dollar, as the only legal tender in the country. And the pay TV giant MultiChoice is moving to axe some 2,000 jobs in its operations in South Africa.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of a trader in a bustling free market, it's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Authorities in Zimbabwe have declared the interim currency in the country, the RTGS dollar, as the only legal tender over there with effect from Monday the 24th of June. Now, commerce in Zimbabwe has been taking place with a basket of currencies from the sterling pound to the US dollar, the South African rand and the Botswanan pula. Monday's notice, however, essentially means that all foreign currency has ceased being acceptable legal tender over there. The RTGS dollar was introduced back in February 22nd to be exact, as an interim step towards setting up a new currency by the end of 2019. It was pegged originally at the value of 1-to-1 to the US dollar, effectively at parity. But since then, its value has fallen by 60% by last week, as many Zimbabweans complained that goods were actually being priced in foreign currency. Zimbabweans have been skeptical of their own currency since the days of hyperinflation just a decade ago, which destroyed whatever value the Zimbabwean dollar had. Now, elsewhere, the American delivery company FedEx has issued a second apology to the Chinese tech firm Huawei for failing to complete a simple phone delivery. Now, the company claims that an operational error prevented the shipping of a used Huawei phone, a Huawei Mate 30, I believe, from the UK to the United States. The Chinese telecoms equipment maker is currently in the center of an ongoing trade row between the United States and China. Just last month, it was placed in a trade blacklist by the US, cutting it off from American-made components like chips, modems, and even software that it needs to produce its own products. Huawei is reviewing its ties with FedEx over this latest incident. On to telecommunications matters. Africa's largest phone carrier by market value, Vodacom, has reached an agreement with the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to end a long-running standoff over the suspension of its 2G license. Now, the Congolese government suspended that license back in April, saying that Vodacom Congo did not follow the correct procedure when it secured a 10-year renewal for its license in 2015. The telco at the time paid about $16 million, but the DRC's tax authorities said that that sum only cover the cost for extra spectrum and not the license extension. The Joburg-based mobile operator owns 51% of Congo's largest mobile operator. It generated about 6% or so of Vodacom's total revenue of about $6 billion last year. Now, the pay TV giant MultiChoice is planning to restructure its customer service arm, and that in turn could lead to the possible loss of over 2,000 jobs in South Africa. The broadcaster says it's launching a consultation process designed to cut some 2,194 positions. The realignment is due to a response to the changing behavior of its clients, who are increasingly moving away from traditional voice calls and visits to walk-in centres. MultiChoice is one of Africa's largest paid television companies. Since it was spun off and separately listed by its parent firm, Naspers, its shares have gone up by over 27%. Old car parts and oil drums often find their way into scrap metal yards or into junk piles, but a small organisation in South Africa known as AfriCrafters has found a way to keep harmful rubbish out of landfills while creating sustainable businesses for artists. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the details.
Lucretia Polton's early years of travel inspired a vision to help roadside artists. It led to the birth of AfriCrafters 2 years ago, a platform that grows and links South African artists to the global supply chain.
There were a number of crafters working from the side of the road, working out of their homes, and it was simply a case of hand-to-mouth living. Their products were being purchased at a rock-bottom price and sold at exorbitant prices to the international marketplace. It was then that I thought I need to now start doing something where there was a lot of transparency, where we could educate the artist as to how to price their products and where to actually peg it at, so that they were making sufficient profit margins for themselves.
Polton works with dozens of artists who transform metal and plastic waste into distinctive handmade pieces.
These are bird feeders made specifically for our international markets, and they're made from recycled car parts. So these are fantails made specifically for the New Zealand market. These are tuis, which again also made from oil drums and recycled car parts. Basically any steel that we can recycle, that's what we would use for these products.
AfriCrafters' products are gaining traction among environmentally conscious consumers around the world and are exported to UK, Germany, Australia and New Zealand.
It's very unusual. We don't get anything like this back at home, and the fact that it's recycled, all made from recycled scrap metal, is very appealing to our buyers. We have a mix of the African and stuff that's made specifically for our New Zealand market.
Art is not a necessity, so someone can live without art. So you have to have right customers for art. When I found this place, things started changing. Doors opened for me because this is nice and in the highway, and I've got a big workshop. So everything now, we do everything here. And I met Lucretia also. She managed to hook us to other customers, international customers.
Most local artists, like the ones you see behind me, depend on passing tourists for their livelihoods. AfriCrafters has managed to sidestep one of the biggest hurdles faced by small businesses with its unique model to trade directly with buyers abroad. Julie Shara, CGTN, Durban, South Africa.
For the field now, Shanghai has become quite the symbol of modernization ever since its liberation some 70 years ago. One of the major reasons for its success has been its maritime industry. The city has established itself as a business capital, but it's also home to the world's busiest container port for the 9th year in a row. With the details, here's CGTN's Yuwen.
This is how Huanghua moves Shanghai's goods to the world and the world to Shanghai, loading and unloading shipping containers. But he never touches them. A few taps on the screen push the handle forward and a radio call. This is Yangshan port, and its 16 cranes are the heart of the world's first fully remote control port system. It's all quite different from Huang's first job here.
It was exhausting when I used to be stuck in a small operating cab. The remote control system is a lot more pleasant and takes a lot of stress out of the job.
The 16 cranes behind me can handle over 10,000 containers a day. And if you look at the automated vehicles on the ground, they are moving containers to and from the storage zone and are entirely operated by autonomous systems. It's no surprise that Shanghai once again leads the country and much of the world in making maritime trade smarter. The city had always been a great seaport because of its position at the mouth of the Yangtze River, connecting the city to the Pacific Ocean via the East Sea. Even 70 years ago, it was a pioneer in maritime trade, man-powered maritime trade. The cargo capacity at Shanghai was around 1.5 million tons annually in the early 1950s, the largest of any port nationwide. When China began a 3-year period of economic recovery and consolidation in 1949, local governments took over the running of the nation's ports. They were placed under direct state ownership and management in the first 5-year plan, which ran from 1953 to 1957. The major trade goods at the time were coal and building materials. A major boost to trade came in the 1970s when China began re-establishing relations with a variety of nations, including 2 major economies, Japan and the United States. Between 1973 and 1978, Shanghai built 24 new shipping berths, as well as renovating older ones. In the 1980s came the country's reform and opening up, and a resulting explosion in trade volume, which overwhelmed the existing ports. Shanghai declared clearing the ports to be a government priority and began introducing shipping containers and the equipment to handle them. The growth may have been robust, but cargo was still handled in the old way. Shou's son is now the general manager at the shipping company and recalls when there were 14 docks along the Huangpu River until the late 20th century when the ships got too big for them.
In the early 1990s, the ships docked along the Huangpu River and the cargo was carried off into the warehouses. Then we needed to figure out which warehouses your cargo was in and go claim it. It was all manual work and we were worn out. Now things are quite different, given that goods are being shipped in containers and we no longer have to claim them by ourselves.
Port modernization became a major focus of the Shanghai government in the 1990s. Shanghai International Port Group has primary responsibility for the city's upgraded maritime trade facilities. Founded in 1988, SIPG built and expanded the Yangshan Deep Water Port between 2002 and 2008. The conglomerate began the installation of smart port equipment in Yangshan in 2014. SIPG says Shanghai's container throughput for 2018 was over 40 million units. That's a worldwide record for the 9th straight year, and Yangshan accounted for some 44% of it. With the city established as a key and modernized international shipping center, port workers like Huanghua will be looking forward to handling even more of Shanghai's ever-increasing trade. Yuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
On to Namibia now. The country is rich in wind resources, but it doesn't have enough electricity supply. So then, enter XEMC Wind Power. It's a Chinese turbine producer. It's collaborating with a French firm to build the Southwest African nation's first wind farm. According to the International Energy Agency, Namibia has an annual electricity demand of some 6 million kilowatt hours, but over a third of the country's population doesn't have access to the national grid. And power demand, remember, is rising at about 5% a year. The Ombepo wind farm is already operational. It's got 3 of the 7 turbines planned, completed, and linked up to the national grid. The power generated by one turbine in 2 days is able to power the town of Ludritz, where the project is based, for an entire week.
Based on the data over the last 2 years of operation, performance has been beyond our expectations.
After our wind turbines were put into operation, we also helped the local community to improve their power grid and the power transmission facilities. The residents were very happy.
We started in Zimbabwe, we wrap up with Zimbabwe. The University of Zimbabwe has gotten an interesting donation, some of the latest IT gear from Huawei. The project is part of the company's support in kind. It's designed to ensure that Zimbabwe does attain high standards in global tech. Remember, Zimbabwe is, of course, home to the country with the highest literacy levels on the continent. This donation will go into improving the electronics and telecommunications tech courses at the university.
The deployment of ICT infrastructure and services is essential to reinforce and support social engagement, social inclusion, and cultural enrichment. In a world where information and communications technology has made it possible for more people to access, generate, and share ideas, and in a world where ICT is playing a greater role in the way that we do business than before, we urgently need a new breed of trained ICT professionals who can operate and maintain ICT infrastructure and networks, and thus make it possible for us to maximize these new possibilities.
We would also like to continue to cooperate with Zimbabwean schools, universities, colleges to build capacity and enhance technical skills transfer to students.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. But here's what's coming up at the top of the hour. We'll be actually going back to Zimbabwe, live to Harare. In fact, authorities there, as we mentioned earlier, declaring the RTGS dollar as the only legal tender in the country. But how is this monetary reform going to actually work out? We'll have some answers for you live from Harare at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Beatrice.
Indeed, Rama, thank you. Well, we still have more news for you on the program. Here's what's ahead. Artists use a photo voice exhibition in Mogadishu to address injustices and highlight challenges among Somalia's youth.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
On to the Horn of Africa now, and a photo voice exhibition has attracted young people in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Organizers hope to use the opportunity to address injustices, marginalization, and highlight challenges facing the society. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more.
23-year-old Sabir Osman is explaining to a group of young people the plight facing the youth in his country. He is among 11 people from marginalized communities and displaced camps participating in this photo voice exhibition taking place at a popular beach in Mogadishu. Participants were mostly drawn from marginalized communities, including displacement camps in the capital. Sabir has been living in an IDP camp for years after fleeing conflict in southern Somalia.
The young man in this photo is contemplating on whether or not to migrate, and is weighing his option that include migrating to seek a better life abroad. This is because of unemployment and the fact that young people have been ignored and not afforded job opportunities.
Hundreds of young men and women from Somalia have perished in the high seas in recent years in an attempt to seek a better life elsewhere, with unemployment among the youth considered as the main cause of illegal migration.
It's a participatory platform where we have trained people from the IDPs and from minority communities to actually take pictures and photos about their life, about social inclusion, about exclusion. And they have done this wonderful photographic exhibition at Lido Beach.
The exhibition is taking place at Lido Beach, a symbol of hope and resilience for most residents in Mogadishu. Each photo displayed here today carries a different message, that of the many challenges facing the Somali society, ranging from illegal migration, insecurity and displacement.
The intention is to actually raise awareness for the oppressions and injustices that are happening between society, especially in Somalia, where minorities are marginalized, where people from IDBs are pushed aside. So they just want to express their grievances. They want to show the public that they are part of society.
Aliyah Sheikh has been a school teacher since 1977. Her passion for education brought her to this photo exhibition. She tells me that she has abandoned her profession due to old age, but continues to encourage young people on the importance of education.
I took this picture because of my love and passion for education. I stopped teaching in school because of my old age, but that hasn't distracted me from creating awareness and sensitizing young people on the importance of education.
The International Committee on Development of People is supporting the week-long program as a means of encouraging inclusion and raising awareness on critical issues affecting many in Somalia. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
In Saudi Arabia, women are savoring the driving experience 1 year since the world's only ban on female drivers was lifted. The move was part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's reform drive, although female activists had been campaigning for years. Many Saudi women are celebrating this anniversary by talking about their journey. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
68-year-old Sabiha Al-Fakr learned how to drive back in the 1990s. The mother of 5 says that her late husband taught her in secret during trips abroad to neighboring Bahrain. But she's never been allowed to drive on the roads back home in Saudi Arabia until last year.
Female activists paved the way for us and a way for the whole society. Of course, we are all supporting them, and thanks be to God that it is a good start and they have an impact.
It has now been 1 year since the lifting of the ban on female drivers. This has been the most visible symbol of the conservative kingdom's modernization drive. But women wishing to get behind the wheel still face logistical challenges.
Unfortunately, there was no proper organization for driving test and training. They only open a few places, which cannot handle the numbers. For this reason, some applicants do not have their licenses yet. I have colleagues who are the same age as me. They do not want to drive and are afraid of learning. They say that they are too old and cannot take this step. So I keep encouraging them and I think they will do it.
Hardliners believe that allowing women to drive would promote gender mixing and promiscuity. But for many women, the reform has ended their dependence on chauffeurs and male relatives to get around.
Change a lot. It gave them the freedom. It gave them the chance to get rid of the drivers, because the drivers, they spend a lot of money, you know, and there's a lot of problems go through the drivers. We feel like in a cage before, and it's like open the cage, we fly, we go wherever. That's what we felt, all the Saudi women. And
unlike studying or getting married, women do not require a male guardian's permission to obtain a driving license. But for a society steeped in conservatism, female drivers continue to face a backlash on social media and sometimes from within their own families. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Bizarre scenes as England bundles Cameroon out of the FIFA Women's World Cup.
Africa, where champions are made.